So for the past 2 weeks or so, I've been playing a lot of Dark Souls 2, the Scholar of the First Sin version, and now I'm proud that I can finally say that I've completed all 3 Souls games 100%. And I was sorta cutting it a bit close too, with The Ashes of Ariandel coming out in just a few days. But I mean, yeah, I feel like I've got a pretty decent grasp on the trilogy as a whole, and honestly I just wanted to give my 2 cents on the game because of its controversial nature around fans of the series. First things first though, I'd like to preface this by saying I'm technically new to the franchise, so that may or may not have an impact on my perspective on things. I've had an interest on these games for a couple years now, but I've only really gotten an Xbox controller adapter for my PC just last year, embarrassingly enough, and I don't quite want to mention the game that pushed me to do that either. Anyways, with that in mind, I actually started with Dark Souls 3, which I thought it was a great game, but it also has its own set of issues and certain things the fanbase is divisive on as well. I don't really want to get into too much details about it since the video isn't about that, but I wanted to mention this because of my experience playing it and how it introduced me to the franchise. I probably did 6 or 7 playthroughs on that, spending almost 200 hours simply because of how fun the game was. Usually when I get all achievements or quote unquote do everything that you can do in a game, I stop playing. But with this, I just kept going again and again because I loved it. So it should be no surprise that I decided to go back to the other 2 games, and I found a perfect opportunity too, when both Dark Souls 1 and 2 went on sale with around 75% off discount. My next game on the series was Dark Souls 1, and that was really good as well, but it also made me have a lot of those "oh, so that's where this came from" moments, like with Siegmeyer and Siegward, or with Lautrec and Leonhard, where they both end up killing a certain character and you can later invade them to retrieve their victim's soul. Then there's stuff like on Orlando obviously, and all that, and it was just really interesting to see, all the throwbacks in Dark Souls 3 and how a lot of it made sense now. And the lore too is really something quite special when you can see the discussions on how the theories on things, and so after playing these 2 I really felt like I sorta got it, or at least like 90% of it. And then I played Dark Souls 2. Finally, after 2 minutes into the video I get on to what's actually in the title of it, but yeah. I was aware of the bad rap this game got and how it was made by the B team and all that, but after I played it, well, it wasn't that bad. In fact, it was pretty great in my opinion, and on par with the other Souls games in most aspects. But we gotta take a step back for a second and actually look a little bit deeper into some of its mechanics and how, yeah, despite me saying what I just said, I gotta agree mistakes were made. Some more egregious than others, but I guess that's sort of the nature of things when a different team that has a different take on it takes the reins of things. So I'll be talking about what they did right and what they missed their mark on. So first of all, I'd like to talk about the player's health and the curse, where you lose 5% of your total maximum health each time you die, up to a limit of around 50%, or 95% if you have the wretch status, but more on that later. The main way to become human again is through human effigies, which are this game's counterpart to humanity and embers. I think the problem here though is that this mechanic is just really kind of obnoxious without adding much of anything to the table. It's just there to screw you over even more after you die. And I mean, sure, there's a ring that reduces the effects of it, so the maximum is 25% instead, but still, that's a ring slot that you could have been utilizing for something potentially far more useful. It's not even that big a deal late game when you have tons and tons of human effigies, but it's still mildly annoying. All in all though, I think it's a wasted opportunity, especially in the infusions department. I mean, there are a couple weapons that benefit from being hollow, like the Dark Pyromancy Flame and the Scythe or the Greatsword of the Forlorn, but I still think it would have been much more interesting if it was just an infusion you could put on almost all weapons, save for a few exceptions. Because yeah, that risk versus reward playstyle is pretty cool when done right. I mean, one example of it working is with the Red Tearstone ring, and it could have been made even crazier with stuff like the Reg status that I mentioned earlier. But that's also a bit of an annoying thing to obtain too. Basically, the sin mechanic in this game is a bit different. You still keep your sin even after you go to New Game Plus, and you get 1 sin point for killing NPCs or killing other players when invading them as a Red Phantom. But the problem is you only become a wretch after you have 100 sin points, which is a lot. And you can't even see the exact level of sin you're at anyways, so I mean, like I said, it's a wasted opportunity. And while we're still around this topic, let's talk about the human effigies for a second. In Dark Souls 1, humanity was way more useful. You could get increased resistances, item discovery, and remember what I said about infusions? Well, there was the Chaos infusion that scaled damage with humanity. That's an interesting mechanic instead of just adding elemental damage to a weapon. The only mildly interesting infusion in Dark Souls 2, in my opinion, is the mundane one. But anyways, human effigies and humanity. It doesn't do much of anything. I guess your bonus, if you'd like to call it that, is actually being able to use all your health. Which is kinda funny when you think about it, because Dark Souls 3 did a similar thing, but way better with embers. Because they're just a flat 30% bonus to your health when you use them. But it doesn't really feel like you're losing much when you die compared to Dark Souls 2. So to sum that point up, it's just an annoying mechanic that doesn't really have much going on save for a few very specific weapons, which I'd argue wouldn't really be worth the trouble of having this mechanic in the first place. Now let's get onto the elephant in the room here, and probably one of the biggest things about Dark Souls 2's controversy, the adaptability stat and the dodge rolls. But let's tackle this issue into a couple of different parts. First of all, I'd like to talk about what they did right with this in my opinion. Equipment load is a more gradual thing here, and what that means is there aren't just a few different thresholds that determine where your weight class is. There is still the fat rolling at 70%, and at 120% your character can't roll or sprint at all, but it's much more of a gradient here, meaning that the value slowly increases or decreases when working up to these thresholds. So someone at 30% equip load, for instance, will have rolls that cover around 10% more distance than someone at 50%. It's all very gradual, but I think it makes for a more variety depending on your build and what armor set you're actually using. But here's what they did wrong. The adaptability and consequently the agility stat, and how that affects how many iframes your dodge roll will get. Now, there are different arguments in favor and against this. Like some people come and say, so what if it's a stat? The whole game's based on numbers anyways, so is it really that different from, say, doing more damage as you increase your strength stat, or increasing your health with the vigor stat? And while I think there may be some validity to that, I'm more on the side leaning towards that adaptability was just a bad idea overall. I think it's more due to consistency than anything else. I mean, I know that in all technicality the whole game is based on numbers, but I think certain timings shouldn't really be based on stats. Like for instance, wouldn't it be kinda silly if parrying was somehow tied to a stat? Like the more you increased it, the bigger the window you have to do it. Or maybe a stat that changed the speed at how you swung weapons and all that. I think we could all agree that it would be sorta silly, wouldn't it? And that's what I mean by consistency. When you play Dark Souls 1 and 3, your rolls feel tight, like you just have to time it correctly. And that's an important thing in difficult games. You gotta have tight controls so you don't feel like something is the game's fault, but the players for not being good enough, so that inspires you to keep at it and to overcome that challenge. But in Dark Souls 2's early game, it just feels bad until you actually invest into adaptability. And look, I'm not that big of a PvP guy, but I was thinking about this too for a while. I could be wrong here, but when I hear about the soul level meta for Dark Souls 1 and 3, you could hear different ranges like 80, 100, 120. Some people like to go higher than that, but I think those 3 are the most popular. But in Dark Souls 2, the one I heard the most was 150, which seemed kinda high for me after playing the other 2 games. Is that because of adaptability, or am I just flat out wrong here? I mean, it could be since everyone has to level it anyway, so that gives it a little bit more wiggle room for that? Well, I don't know, it's just a thought really, but some of you watching could provide me some insight in the comments, I suppose. But it's not just adaptability really. The hitboxes in Dark Souls 2 do feel a bit janky overall. There were quite a few instances of me going like, really? That hit me? Okay then. It's just hard to explain, and yet it feels like something's off. And then there are the grab hitboxes, which are just insane, especially the mimics. It reaches crazy levels of how did they not fix this kind of stuff. Like their whole body is considered a hitbox for some reason, so even if you're behind them, you're immediately teleported to being eaten by them. Or attacks that should have just grazed you turn into devastating grab attacks because of these spotty hitboxes. So overall, this is a game that takes some getting used to. It's hard to put my finger on the specifics though. When I played Dark Souls 3 for instance, I died quite a lot on a ton of different occasions. But it was my first Souls game, and it's one of those things where it feels really satisfying when you realize your growth. As even when I made a new character for another playthrough, I had a much easier time with the game overall. And that sorta happened with Dark Souls 1 as well. It didn't feel like it was that hard. Maybe my experience from DS3 helped me there, as I only started having trouble winning some bosses on New Game Plus. And man, let me tell you, Manus on New Game Plus was no joke. That guy kicked my ass so many times, but that's beside the point. What I mean by all this is that in Dark Souls 2 I died quite a lot early on. It felt like I was new to the series again in a weird way. But then it all sorta clicks again after a while, to the point where I really feel embarrassed now by how many times it took me to defeat the Pursuer. I mean, he's so easy, let's be real here. But fuck that room with two of them, that was almost impossible. In a way though, Dark Souls 2 feels like a more difficult game overall. I think it's due to a combination of various factors, but I do think the game hits the mark on that regard. For instance, you have less Estus than in the other games, and it takes longer to heal. Sure, you got life gems too, but they generally take even longer and heal less. And so I think that's one of the things that go underappreciated in this game. There's a lot of variety here, not only in the consumable items you've got at your disposal, but also on your weapons arsenal too. Plus, there are interesting mechanics like torches and how some enemies react to them, or even crazier stuff like power stancing, which I don't personally use all that much since I usually don't consider it all that worth it, but I still think the option of being there is just nice to have. And I mean, the ability to dual wield ultra greatswords is pretty cool. I mean, honestly, it's just kinda sad that they didn't return in Dark Souls 3, but I guess there's the whole thing with weapon arts. Maybe not have them at all if you're power stancing, or just have a couple generic ones that depend on the type of weapons you're dual wielding, because generally speaking, without power stancing, dual wielding feels pretty useless. Like there's no benefit to it if you can use both weapons at the same time. Although I guess DS3's solution to that is have a couple weapons which are just actually two, like twin spears or twin swords and all that. It kinda works I guess, but it's a much less elegant solution in my eyes, since in Dark Souls 2 you could do it with pretty much almost anything. There's also the bonfire aesthetics, which is another nice mechanic where you can fight specific bosses or go through certain areas with their rewards again, like a mini New Game Plus for those that don't want to go through the whole game again, or that want to farm or just want to do it for fun. New Game Plus overall is the best of all three games. They actually surprise you again with enemy placement, and even some bosses are slightly different, or in the case of Freya, she actually shows up early, and the damage you do to her actually carries to the actual fight. Just really neat stuff like that, which some people kinda expected of DS3 too, but then it didn't end up happening. And then there's level design, which I won't deny, Dark Souls 3 is great at it. Most of its levels have really clever shortcuts that loop back to a certain bonfire, like in the Cathedral of the Deep, or they're just quote-unquote open, where you can approach things from a lot of different angles. And Dark Souls 1's world design is fantastic, where by the end you have a pretty good grasp of it and how to move around it easily. It was definitely needed though, as even after you get the ability to teleport between bonfires, you technically can't warp between all of them, only a select few. Which is a design decision I don't mind all that much, but it would have been a little bit helpful on some occasions. Dark Souls 2 certainly has some of those elements, but they're a bit few and far between. It's mostly pretty linear with an optional alternate path here and there, which can lead to a secret item or a covenant and whatnot. But in its defense, I also say that each area usually utilizes its main gimmick quite well, and they can play off other mechanics that I mentioned earlier, like the torch to light your way, or to burn a windmill, or to even gauge how deep the water level is so you don't fall off. And they even stepped it up on the DLCs where the level design is more solid, but also harder in general. I guess it's a way to make it so it lasts longer, so the DLC is worth more, but we'll get back to those in a bit. In terms of game progression though, DS2 is pretty open-ended, in the order that you want to tackle most bosses, while DS3 for instance is much more linear. I mean sure, everybody knows that you can fight the dancer early at this point, but you still need a key to access the Grand Archives, which you can only get after defeating 3 Lords of Cinder. Something kinda related to level design that I also want to mention are illusory walls. You could attack or roll into them in the other games, but in Dark Souls 2 you have to go up to them and press A for whatever reason. And I only really found that out when I looked it up and was more than halfway through the game. And that really surprised me because at that point I just thought every message was just trolling about illusory walls, but some of them were actually legit. It was just that attacking the wall didn't do anything at all. And the Scholar of the First Sin edition is supposed to be the version that fixes things, or at least that touches up on certain segments, which it certainly did, of course. I mean, I was watching a couple speedruns of vanilla Dark Souls 2, and a lot of enemy placement was changed, mostly for the better in my eyes. But then they also made the Shrine of Amana harder, for instance, by adding more casters. And there are also some questionable ones, like allowing you to pretty much skip Dragon Area if you want to, which is pretty weird in my opinion. I guess another weird complaint I have is just the looks of certain places. I mean, overall the game looks fine, but I feel like it's lacking clutter or detail in certain places, like some rooms are just flat out empty. And the most jarring example of this, in my opinion, are the primal bonfires, which should just feel important somewhat, but they're just sitting into these big rooms with pretty much nothing going on into them. It's hard to explain, but I guess in a way it's all the little things that add up, you know? I think that's sorta the main thing that strikes me about this game more than anything else. Now let's talk bosses. I think the thing with that in Dark Souls 2 is that most of them are fine, you know? But they're not all that memorable. I think it's a situation of quality over quantity here, and that kinda shows in the DLCs as well. Like it's always two nice or even great bosses, and then one bullshit why is this even a thing boss, complete with its own crazy area. Going from bad to worse, there's the petrified spitting statues and the gang squad, then there's the gauntlet that is the iron pathway and the blue smelter demon, which admittedly was a nice twist at least on the original boss, so he was way harder, but it's still a reskin at the end of the day. Dark Souls 1 did reskins as well, by the way, and I'm not saying that's forgivable either, but then you have the Frigid Outskirts and the Twin Kitties, which just feels so lazy because it reskins a boss from the same DLC which you probably fought like 30-40 minutes earlier at that point, and they're just like, here, just fight two of them now. I guess I have an issue with gank bosses in general. I don't think they're very fun to fight at all. Some other examples would be the Ruin Sentinels, for instance, which is just the same mob multiplied by 3. I think it can be done well though if they're different and sorta complement each other like the Throne Watcher and Defender, but the run up to those guys on the Frigid Outskirts? Man, I mean, just why? I mean, yeah, I know there's the crazy ice horses or reindeer or whatever, but that's not even the main issue. There's a point where you can get a pretty solid route down so that you can go to the boss without pretty much fighting any of them, but it still takes like 4 to 5 minutes to get there, just because the area is so big, and you have to do it every time you want to retry the boss. Ugh. And I mean, Nashandra as the final boss? She really isn't all that challenging, and I know you can say the same for Gwyn, where you can parry him like crazy, but it still feels, I don't know, not quite as grandiose, if that makes any sense. And then there's the Soul of Cinder for DS3, which is a great boss too, with its multiple movesets and then just being Gwyn 2.0 at the end there. It just doesn't really compare, sadly. And that's the thing, it's not that DS2 bosses are bad or anything, I mean, some of them are like the Congregation, but then you also have the Ancient Wyvern, or the Deacons in DS3, or the Moonlight Butterfly in DS1. But when you compare the good bosses, the iconic ones from DS1 and DS3, they sort of feel like they're on a whole different league than DS2. And I want to make it clear here that this is not nostalgia speaking. Like I said in the beginning of this video, I played all 3 games this year. I think the only ones that can really compare are the good DLC ones. Like Sir Alone was really good and his arena looked really nice, Fume Knight was good, Ava and Elana were alright, but the Ivory King, that was an awesome and unique fight. How you have the friendly knights in the beginning, and then the boss arrives through that massive portal like something from Lord of the Rings or an Oblivion Gate. And Sin was really good as well. That's how you do a dragon boss, not the Guardian Dragon or the Ancient Dragon, which just felt boring to fight. Dark Souls 2 does have a lot of content though, I'll give it that. My first playthrough of it probably took around 80 to 90 hours, and I wasn't even using stuff like bonfire ascetics. There's just a lot of optional bosses and fun covenants, and that's something I gotta give to this game as well. Covenants are great here, and once again there's just a lot of variety, even for PvE players. Wanna make the game harder? There's the Covenant of Champions. Want a fun challenge and then a boss at the end? There's the Pilgrims of the Dark. There's your usual territorial one as well with the Bellkeepers, and some really fun and unique ones like the Rat King, which I probably had the most fun with. You can summon someone to your world and then gank them with monsters that are friendly to you. And as you kill people you get these lockstones as a reward, which you can use in the areas you can summon people to enable traps or unlock doors that let out even more monsters to help you. There is your usual reds and blues too, but they also got their own special arenas to fight in, and the Dragon Remnants where you duke it out for dragon scales. I will say though that it was a mixed bag for me, probably since there's not as many people playing like there were on launch. But then there's also the whole soul memory system, which pretty much made me farm for sunlight medals because I couldn't find people to summon me, even in the highlighted areas on the bonfire. And let me tell you something about farming, it's extremely boring, and I still got PTSD from farming those proofs of a Concord kept in DS3, which at this point I don't even know if the Dark Moon Covenant was fixed or not, but I don't want anything to do with it either after that. And at the end of the day, that's Dark Souls 2 for you. It has cool ideas, interesting mechanics, it feels very different, but for everything it does right, there's also some annoying thing that comes with it. And that's honestly pretty sad because it holds back an otherwise amazing game. It's still great though in my eyes. I've had a lot of fun playing it, and I even did a no bonfire challenge run for fun. I might try a no death one at a later point, but I'd need more time and be more psychologically prepared for that. But I guess that's one of the things people criticize DS3 for as well, because it could have implemented a lot of those ideas, it could have done them right, you know? But for the most part, it decided to just forget about it instead.